Hello, today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of November. Here's a quick look. I read 3 books and 2 short stories. Ratings-wise, nothing quite hit a 5-star this month, though we did get very, very close, and I did have a surprising low-rated one. Also, what you don't see on this list is I did very lightly continue with Toll the Hounds, and I am about halfway through Absolution, so that one, both of those ones will be carrying into December. But if you watch my TBR, then you've already seen me talk about Toll the Hound and how I plan on focusing in on it in December. Okay, first book that I finished this month was Endless Night, and this actually got a dedicated reading vlog with spoilers. So if you want to see my spoiler-filled thoughts, I chronicled my journey reading through this book, trying to predict who I should be suspicious of and why. I'm just gonna say I did an amazing job and hope that you don't watch the video to verify that. When I was in a fanciful mood, I used to think that piece of land had laid a spell on you. You were a man in love with a house that you might never own, that you might never see, that might never even be built. So this book follows a man named Michael, who is a bit of a nomad of sorts. He hops from job to job, place to place, until his eyes fixate on a specific house that he wants to build and a specific land that he wants to build on. He kind of dreams of it, he romanticizes it, he imagines a future where this could be his life. Then he falls in love with a woman who he sees sitting under a tree. They have a whirlwind romance, quickly get married, and decide to build this house. Now, the whole first half of this novel, this is an Agatha Christie story, so you expect there to be a mystery, and the whole first half of this novel, where's the mystery? We can't find it. But eventually things start picking up to where it's clear something is amiss. And I so enjoyed, first of all, getting to know these characters, slowly seeing the holes in the stories that they're telling and figuring out who I'm supposed to be suspicious of and why. Then when things start unraveling, it just kind of launches itself into motion and doesn't stop moving, and then it just turns so dramatic in the best way. In the way so many classics are, where it's just so over the top. It's my kind of drama. In the buddy read, quite a few people complained that it was boring because, you know, nothing was happening. And I just never found it boring. I thought that it was so charming. I enjoyed reading it so much. I honestly don't have a complaint about it, and I might as well just kick it to 5 stars, really, because I enjoyed it so much. But there's something that holds me back just a little bit from giving that full 5 stars, but it is so close to it because I enjoyed this story front to back so much, especially at the end when the chaos began. I was just eating it all up. What a satisfying book. Oh my goodness. Next book that I read is called Foster. I try to remember another time when I felt like this, and am so sad because I can't remember a time, and happy too because I cannot. So this was my first short story of the month. So I listened to this on audio, and the audio was only an hour long. So we're following a young girl who, her family doesn't have a lot of time for her, and when her mother gets pregnant again, she isn't really able to care for her entire household, and so this young girl goes off to live with another family. This family happens to have lost their child recently, so they have a place for her, and they have a need in their life of nurturing someone. And this little girl, who remains unnamed throughout the short story, has a need in her life of being nurtured. So it's a very sad story because we know that this arrangement is temporary, and because we see how much healing happens in this short summer that she spends with this other family. But healing in both directions. At the same time, it's also incredibly sweet and tender because we don't spend any time in the before. We spend all our time in that healing time, and we watch the healing happen and the bonds form. It's a very simple story, and it's told from the perspective of a young child, so it has very simple language to describe things, but also the descriptions are quite vivid because this young child, she is experiencing the landscapes and the house and the traditions, habits of the family all for the first time. So it's all described well. It's all very immersive, but it's also childlike in its telling. Honestly, it's amazing that so much is packed into so few words and so much is said in the unsaid. Because of that, it's a story that I feel demands discussion. I had so much fun discussing this story after I was done reading it. There were a few of us that read it together, and we kind of discussed, you know, how bitter do you see it? How sweet do you see it? What do you think happened in the after? Do you think, well, I won't go too deep. The discussion of how we perceived certain unsaid elements and the discussion of where we would hope the story would go from here was just as enjoyable for me as the story itself. And of course, I mentioned in my TBR for this month that that Joanna was the one that recommended it to me. So of course I also discussed it with Joanna at the end, which was amazing as well. I love discussing books with her. So we had a great discussion of the implications as well. I just think for such a small story, it gives so much to the reader to unpack. Again, this book was so close to being 5 stars, and yet I held back just a touch, but I enjoyed it so much. Next book I read was Brief Cases. This is a collection of short stories in the Dresden Files. It is 14.5, I think, in the lineup, 15.5, who knows, I've lost count. Anyway, I did do a spoiler-filled video for this one as well, and just talked about each of my favorite short stories, a couple of complaints that I had, but overall my experience with Brief Cases was positive, though I do prefer Butcher in long-form format over short story format, even though some of his short stories really are standouts. Next up is Nightward. How he loves you, and yet he hurts you all the same? That's what people can do if you give them your trust. The lesson I teach you freely: never give people your trust. They will only betray you. Nightward is a book that I have a little bit harder time talking about because I loved the world and the magic in this book. It's all Caribbean-based mythology. I think the world is very expansive. There's so much happening within this world and within this character cast. And I think the world and the magic and the found family are what kept me reading despite the qualms that I have, because I really never had a hard time picking this book up. I thought that it was readable and enjoyable the entire way through. I think my main complaint is that I wish the book was either much longer, or alternatively, since I understand that a debut author would probably have a hard time writing a huge book, split it into 2. The storyline is fairly simple in concept. We have a 10-year-old girl who is set to inherit the throne, and on the night where she's supposed to be, I don't remember the term for it, on the night where it's supposed to validate, you know, her destiny, what she's going to become. On that night, her mother is killed and her father and brother are kidnapped. And then she has to flee with her 19-year-old guard. And there's this really lovely found family between her, the guard, as well as one other character. And this bond evolving from this, you know, this stereotypical royalty and protector, bodyguard sort of thing to something that is very more like a familial bond, something that's very, very tender and close, was so satisfying for my found family loving heart. And I absolutely loved where it all progressed in that realm for this book so much. But also, with me enjoying experiencing the world and the magic so much, my main complaint of the book is that for the world, for the magic, for the characters, everything I just wish was more fleshed out. There's a lot about the world and the caste system and the details of this very broad world that I still don't really feel like I have my head wrapped around. There was so much going on, despite the plot in many ways being simple and being something that's familiar. I still felt like I couldn't really grasp. It seemed like there was so much crammed into this book, and if we had just been able to take more time to flesh everything out, then I could have gotten so much more out of what is a fantastic world. Or at the very least, a very fascinating one. It piqued my interest. I just never felt like I could go as deep with it as I wanted to. I think at the end of this book, I would describe it as great potential for the sequels. I'm really curious to see how the sequels are received and how much deeper they go. So I'm, at this point, feeling unsure. At this point, I feel like I probably won't continue with the series, but I am going to keep an eye out for early reviews when the second book comes out to see what people are saying. And if people say that the world and the characters and everything goes a lot deeper and we kind of hone in on some of the lore and some of the mechanics of things, not that, I mean, I love a good soft magic system, but just explaining things a little bit more, going a little bit deeper with things, then I'll probably pick up the sequel because I really, really like some of the ideas here. Final thing I read this month is The Answer Is No, which is another short story. This one by one of my all-time favorite authors, Fredrik Backman, and I didn't really love this. We have received complaints from the neighbors in the area about a small pile of junk, but after my inspection, it is clear that it is, in fact, a large pile of junk. In fact, it is so big that it is actually not plausible that it even is a pile of junk. I'm not following, Lucas admits. It cannot be a pile of junk, the small man states. But you do see that it's a pile? Lucas tries. Yes, but it is not plausible, the man informs him. But it's there, says Lucas. Plausibly, no, the man corrects. But you can see it, Lucas insists. What I just read is only a small portion of that scene, and it is from my favorite scene in the short story. So as you can see, this short story did not get a high rating from me, unfortunately. And that's because I have such mixed feelings about it, and in general, it's lower on my list of Backman stories to read. This one, while Backman is impressively good at quickly honing in on human nature and presenting it and describing it well. Like, for instance, like, oh my goodness, there's so many good quotes. Like, when it's describing the board of people that are trying to solve the problem that's at hand, and it says that the board doesn't actually want to solve the problem. People almost never want to do that. Or talking about the type of people that are complaining about a problem, and oftentimes the type of people that are complaining about the problem are the ones that are deeply involved in the problem. Things like that, where Backman can very slightly allude to something or say something in a roundabout way that articulates so much of human nature. But he also has the tendency every now and then to kind of eep into being overly heavy-handed. I think Backman is so good at very subtly alluding to things or saying something in a roundabout way that ends up kind of hitting the point even harder if it was just plainly stated. But then sometimes he'll plainly state something and then even go so far as to overstate the something. And I think in this short story, he went to that length multiple times. Like, there were a couple of scenes where I was like, oh my goodness, like I feel a little bit battered by the point. There will probably be people that listen to this review that are like, I don't agree, and that's fine. But there were just certain scenes that I felt like the point was overstated instead of subtly alluded to, which I feel is one of Backman's skills, and one of the reasons why I love him so much is the allusions as opposed to the on-the-nose statements. I've just realized I've not described the short story to you. So quickly, we have Lucas, who is a homebody, and just really likes to be left alone. Doesn't want people in his life, doesn't want communication, he just wants to eat his pad thai and play his new video game that he just got. And he does not want to be bothered. And this whole short story is him being bothered. So at first it's a frying pan. A frying pan is left out, which is breaking the apartment code, the code of conduct. Breaking the rules. Like, you don't do that. You don't just leave your frying pan. You don't just discard it out in the open. And so then the board of people, which are three very obnoxious people, they are trying to solve the problem, and they end up kind of forcing Lucas into the problem solving of the problem. Then we have an annoying neighbor, and then we have a neighbor in a coma who's not actually in a coma. The whole short story is essentially a man who wants to be left alone and absolutely no one will leave him alone, and chaos ensues. And it really leans into Bachman's humor. Some of his humor hit me perfectly, like when they were trying to involve, what was he, a city manager? A city hall representative? And he just refused to deal with the problem. He's just like, nope, that seems implausible. I'm just not going to deal with it. And it's like, well, the problem is there. And it's just like, it was almost Hitchhikers-esque. It was such a nonsense scene, and it had me cracking up. But then there were other instances where the humor didn't land for me because everybody was just being really annoying. And so the chaos that was happening, I was like, I just don't like any of you. So overall, between some of the scenes being overly on the nose for my taste, and some of the humor being overly annoying, leaning into the annoyances that people can have, the annoying habits that people can have for my taste, and the story being so short, it's only 68 pages, so it's very condensed to pack all that chaos into it, and with half of the chaos missing for me, it just ended up being a lower rated story. And even with all that said, I still had a pretty good time with the story. It wasn't that, it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't anywhere near the top of my list for a Bachman, but I got the ebook for free on Kindle Unlimited, and it was so quick that, I'm not complaining. I just wouldn't recommend this as maybe a starting point for Bachman. Or if you used it as your entry point, maybe try another one of his stories to see what else he's capable of. And if you want to give him a short second test, then I would recommend And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, because that can show how much he can pack into a short story that's not just pure chaos and more of those emotional punches that I love him so much for. So there you go, that's my month. Those are the books that I read in the month of November, as well as the short stories. Like I said, I am halfway through Absolution, so I should have that done here in the next few days, I hope. And if you missed my TBR for December, I did post that as the last video that I posted, so you can check out what I plan on reading in December as well. But if you have read any of these books, or if you plan on picking some of them up after seeing what I thought of them, please do chat with me more about them in the comments of this video. I would love to hear what other people thought about any of these stories, so please do chat with me more in the comments, and I will see you again soon. Bye.